So our next is going to be on police review. We'll address it to Martine Watkins, Nate Kennedy, Chris Crone, and Robert Singleton, and Steve. No, I think that's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Cynthia Matthews.
And Cynthia Matthews. So we'll go to you first. Given the recent controversies surrounding Sean Arlt's death, do you believe the current training of SCPD officers is adequate?
You know, I mean, I don't know enough about actually the specifics. I did meet with somebody who actually works at the county with me, but is also a contractor who does additional hours and training for SCPD, and I believe it's 80 hours. I don't want to say exactly what it is, but it's over the minimum requirement. I mean, ultimately, I think what it is about is how do we prevent tragedies like that happening in the first place, you know? And so one of the things that I always try to talk about, well, one of the things that I work on is juvenile justice prevention programs and alternatives. So thinking about what we can do on the front end. And so one of the things that I had an opportunity to learn about from Sheriff Hart, and when individually speaking with him, but also during a presentation he had done on his 21st century policing practices, which was a model that was released by the White House as how our local law enforcement can do more on the front end from preventing tragedies like this from happening in the first place. So it lays out very specific things. It has a community involvement process, it has a review process, it has a number of stakeholders at the table working with law enforcement to look at how we can identify, one, the things that are going well and right and are aligned with what the recommendations of those practices are, but then in addition, how we can always look for continuous improvement and do better. And so I was really inspired and hopeful that we could potentially look at that as a tool or a formal adoption at the city level, and that's just right now for the sheriff's office, which is the unincorporated areas in our county. So I mean, as much as you can do to prevent tragedies like that in the first place, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. So we'll move on to Nate Kennedy.
What I have to say about this whole incident is we should have more of our law enforcement officers using rubber bullets and other non-lethal weapons, I guess you'd call it. Simply put, even if we do end up letting officers keep like guns with real bullets and intended to kill, it should be the higher ranking officers that get those, and for the lower ranking officers, again, rubber bullets. I don't know if they need a special kind of gun, but more, well, for the whole police department, just more access to non-lethal weapons.
Thank you. We'll go to Chris Crump.
Thanks. I was on the city council from 1998 to 2002, and we did have a police review board at that time, and I supported it. And I think that a police review board is a good thing for police and also for the community, because there's a place to go. Right now, when you make a complaint, you have to go to the police station to make that complaint, and it's rather intimidating for a lot of people. And I think that having a review board would help in a situation like this where you have an officer involved shooting. As far as training of Santa Cruz police officers, unless one of us up here was a police officer, it would be very difficult for us to comment on that. Similar to like if a bunch of people were getting hurt in the city parks, we wouldn't be medical experts nor parks experts. If our sewage treatment facility had a leak, we wouldn't be experts on that either. But what you have to be an expert on, that the fact is we're citizen representatives, representatives of the residents of Santa Cruz. And so you have to know how to marshal resources and direct them where they are needed. And for example, Bill de Blasio, a very similar thing happened in New York City. A mentally ill woman was shot by a police officer and killed about 3 days before this unfortunate incident happened in Santa Cruz. And the mayor came out and he was very direct about what happened in that incident. And I'm not saying the mayor should be like, oh my God, and condemn anyone. No, what you do is open up a public forum. You be part of that public forum. You use the civic auditorium. A lot of cities don't have a civic auditorium. You have a civic auditorium and you invite the public in because people need to grieve, for whatever reason. You need to conduct a process. And that process has not been conducted, and it took a long time for there to be, and it was like activists, similar to Beach Flats Garden. It was the activists who got that 60% of the garden back, not necessarily the city council, because it would have been all lost if people didn't come forward. Thank you, sorry.
Can I just say one more thing before I go? Sorry, is that okay?
Yeah, 1 minute.
One thing I just wanted to add was that one thing I did learn about when talking with some of our law enforcement here is that they do have a partnership with Encompass, which is a local nonprofit, to have a mental health a social worker on call who can work sometimes with the officers. So I think we could look at partnerships like that as well. It takes a special kind of person to work, especially with a situation like that, to be able to possibly diffuse a scenario from escalating. So I think we can also look at different kinds of partnerships that are working, that we've seen work not only in our community but others, to help with the various types of incidents that are called for some of the similar to what happened on that evening. And is there any other questions for me?
No, it's
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Sorry.
No problem. We'll go to Robert Singleton next.
Yes.
Do you want to go to Cynthia first to talk about the mayor
Sure.
analogy?
Sure.
Sure,
Yeah, 1
that's
minute.
fine. And also, we'd like to give Steve you a chance to
Yeah,
speak on this
well, I
question
think
too.
there's questions as well.
Well, I wanted to get back to the original question, really, which was, is the police training adequate? I think was that the
Yes,
question.
yes.
There's always more that can be done. I think what we can say is that our police department's training, in general, its training program and its training in deal with those with mental illness, exhibiting mental illness, far exceeds the standards. Now, that's not to say it can't be improved, but I think there has been a commitment for quite a long time to invest in training for our police officers on dealing with special populations, whether they be mental illness, substance abuse, homelessness, and so forth. What we really take from this really tragic incident was that there has been a failure of the mental health system. And I think that's what's going to come out in the investigation. Bear in mind, this was late at night. It was a rapidly moving situation, and that's why we have committed to a full and independent investigation before we jump to conclusions. It's obviously tragic, and we do want to learn how we can avoid similar or related incidents in the future. I will say, as Martine mentioned, we have an existing partnership with a local nonprofit. So we have a mental health worker accompanying our officers during the daytime. It's a very innovative project. It's very productive, and police departments around the country say, oh my gosh, you do that? That's amazing. So I think let's give credit for the intention and what we are doing, and we have partnerships to get those with mental illness into casework, into housing, into treatment. So we have a broad commitment. We know we can always do more. I hope that the independent investigation shows us how we can do better, and we will do that.
Thank you.
So we'll go to Robert.
Yeah, so I'll be brief. Obviously what happened was tragic. Until all the information comes out, and I know that there was actually a person riding along, an actual citizen riding along, who has also offered testimony. So when all of that testimony comes out, I'll take more of kind of an in-depth look at what happened to that particular night. In terms of the training, I think no, they didn't have enough training. I think our police would actually be the first one to tell you that they don't have a lot of the training for the situation that they deal with. Roughly 80% of our police calls of service are in some way related to mental illness or substance abuse issues. So I think when you're looking at that staggering level of caseload, most police will tell you that we're become de facto social workers, but I wasn't trained as a de facto social worker. Most social workers I know have gotten a master's degree in public policy or public health or something, and have gone through extensive case. I mean, to be a caseworker, you have to go through thousands of hours of on-site case training. So I don't think our police are receiving that, nor should they as enforcement officers. Again, we need better mental health infrastructure. And I think the way we do that is we partner in particular with the sheriff's office, but also with our public health agency at a county-wide level to provide long-term mental health treatment. You know, right now, as was mentioned earlier, in the city of Santa Cruz really only have one mental health facility, and the city doesn't even actually offer any money towards that. That's the Mental Health Care Action Network, and that's a day center. So when that center closes down for the night, those folks just kind of are out there or will go wherever they're going. So we need some kind of long-term mental health facility, whether it's in the city or whether it's in the county. It needs to be close by for the point of access. So focusing on that, you know, one of the things I really want to see our police department adopt, that's something the sheriff's department has adopted in line with 21st century policing, is having body cameras. You got to have the body cameras because that provides the most objective view of what's going to go on and will allow us to better assess situations like this, rather than defaulting to kind of looking at basically evidence that doesn't give you a complete picture of things. If you have multiple camera angles and references, that will give you the most objective perspective about what actually happened, and then we can make a better assessment then.
Thank you.
We'll go to Steve.
Could you please reread the question?
Yeah, absolutely. So given the recent controversies surrounding Sean Arlt's death, do you believe the current training for SCPD officers is adequate?
Mm-hmm. So there was the question about citizen review was a different separate question.
That's actually part of our next question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was confused because there was discussion about citizen review. So training, yeah, I don't know entirely what the SCPD officers training is like. I do know, as Martine was talking about, the 21st century policing that the county sheriff's department is doing, which I've been very impressed by reading about it, and I went to the presentation after they put together a task force, and I appreciated that Sheriff Hart said, well, we're not a big city, we don't have the type of tensions they're having in a lot of cities, but that doesn't mean we couldn't do better. And I went to the presentation, the California Department of Justice had a person speaking there, the president of our local ACLU spoke, Tim McKinney, the president of our local NAACP, and 4 of our board of supervisors were there. Watsonville Police Department had people there, Santa Cruz Police Department. Nobody from our city council was there. Nobody from our police department was there. And I was very impressed with a lot of the discussion was about training. Some of it had to do with transparency and body cameras and things, but some of it had to do with training, and they're doing lots of trainings on racial bias, on dealing with people with mental health issues, trainings on de-escalation and avoiding the use of force, and like putting in various stages after there is a critical use of force, peer-to-peer and like supervisor to also conversations of trying to see how might it have been done better. And they gave an example of someone who had a crisis and the officer came to the door, someone came at him with a knife, and he retreated and talked to called back, and they found out a way to resolve the issue without shooting, and the person was in their own home and they were alone, and I don't have time to get into it all, but I think we could learn a lot from the county sheriff's department. I was disappointed that the city didn't really send anyone over there. I'm glad that I'm not sure if it was last week or the meeting before, but one of the recent meetings, the city council agreed belatedly to look into that stuff that was put on by the agenda by Micah Posner, and I'm glad that that's happening. But I think that I could be part of a city council that had a stronger commitment to community policing and training.
If I
Would you
could
like to
just say,
respond? Sure, a minute.
Sure.
that item was put on the agenda by Michael Posner, myself, and Vice Mayor Cynthia Chase.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris wanted to.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if the program that's so popular or that's working downtown, what are the funding sources for it, and how much are we paying for it currently? This pairing of social worker and police officer, and I'm wondering also if the mayor would envision a social worker and a police officer in cars, in the future of policing, because we do know that a lot of the work police officers do is done by social workers.
Do you want to respond to that, Mayor Matthews?
Yes, we do that. That's the program that I mentioned is considered really very innovative and productive. We are doing that
What's
already.
the funding?
The funding comes from the general fund, and we're not going to go into a discussion of city financing, but we have a finite amount of money that we can spend on everything. And other panelists mentioned the city has cut its finance, I'll try and make this really short, has cut its funding for social service program. That's for grants in one budget line, but we have added a huge amount of money in the last 5 years or so from our general fund, so same pot of money towards partnerships with local nonprofits exactly for the things we're talking about here, for people with mental illness, for people dealing with substance abuse, so that we can get those people into treatment. So the overall allocation for what I would call safety net services has increased dramatically. It just shows up in different parts of the budget, but we are doing exactly now what you say, and to the extent that we can choose to make those allocations in the general fund, we will increase those partnerships.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll go.
Is there any chance, I'm sorry to do this, but is there any chance I can just make one quick comment on this question?
We really don't have
We'll
much
have
time.
we will have a closing time to allow every single
Okay.
candidate to talk.
So,
So we'll go to our next
I have
question.
something to say.
Do you believe there should be a system of police oversight, and if so, what should it look like? We'll start with Nate.
I know you just said it, but can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So, do you believe there should be a system of police oversight, and what should it look like?
There definitely needs to be police oversight, and we need to, and police accountability, and even as far as that goes, I think just as Robert was saying a few minutes ago, that body cameras would be very effective. Just even through normal business where the people that would be responding to something are all witnesses, and as a good quote I remember hearing is that the camera is the eye that doesn't lie. So that we'd be able to see what really happened versus testimony that is often inaccurate, sometimes deliberately given inaccurately for various reasons, and I'll just say the police very often abuse their power, and it's a good way of controlling that and adding accountability.
thank you.
Thank you. Chris Crump.
Thanks. I know I spoke about it before because I do think it's actually linked with the training of Santa Cruz police officers as well, and that the notion of if you take a police job in Santa Cruz that there's going to be a police review board used to be the norm, but that was that board was done away with a few years ago. I think you do need an independent body that residents can go to. That's not the police station. You'll probably hear that, oh, well, state law has now made this impossible. Well, I think the next city council has to figure out a way where we have independent review board of what, an oversight of our police department and suggestions about what to do. And that there's an appearance and there's reality too, and the public would like there to be oversight of the police department. At least that's what I'm getting when I knock on doors.
Robert Singleton.
Yeah, I think there definitely needs to be police accountability. I think body cameras are one way to do that and to create evidence that can be looked at. In terms of a police review board, I think we need some kind of citizen oversight in some level, but we need to make sure that those citizens are in some way brought up to speed on the kind of practices and the nuances of law enforcement, because it's very hard if you're not trained in the kind of step-by-step process of going through and dealing with the situation to kind of lead in there. So having that, right now, or what we have right now at the city's level is an independent police auditor who actually coincidentally was the staff member for our police review board when it was existing. And he told me, he said, the main problem we had with the police review board when we were dealing with it is that a lot of the sessions turned out to be large-scale education sessions for the members who were there. And it's not their fault, they weren't trained in police work. So he's like, we need to have some level of police accountability. We just need to make sure the people who are involved in that kind of board understand, or, we can't have them directly from law enforcement because we need to have some kind of independence, but there needs to be some kind of steep learning curve to get in there for them to be trained and brought up to speed about what are the kinds of things that the police are really weighing in that moment in time. And I think body cameras will provide, hopefully, evidence without them constructively weigh in on that if they get that training.
Steve.
Yeah, I'm a strong supporter of citizen police review. I've written a few articles. I don't consider myself a journalist like some of you, but I've written a few here and there, and I wrote one about an incident of police use of force against a a homeless man who was very drunk on a bench downtown, who was not actually causing a disturbance, but he was practically passed out drunk. And he was handcuffed and did not resist, but at the point when they started pushing him in the car, he started kicking the vehicle, and an officer wrapped an arm, spun him around, slammed him face first into the ground, cut a big gash in his face when his face hit the ground, and he had to get stitches. Someone was filming it, and as we know in cases when it gets on film, sometimes it gets attention. The police said they would do a review within a week. It had been over a year when I was writing this article. I couldn't get any information from the police department. They said, well, if anything happened, that would be in his personnel file. It's not a public accessible document. I talked to the so-called independent police auditor, who's a lawyer, who was appointed after the city council some years ago voted to terminate citizen police review. And I talked to Bob Aronson, and he said, oh yeah, I looked into that case. And I was like, oh, and here I was writing, for a public article, and he's like, well, what can you tell me? And he's like, oh, well, I can't share my review with you because it's an internal city document. And so if the independent police auditor's review is not available for public scrutiny, that is not a sufficient system. And how much time do I got left?
30 seconds.
30 seconds. So, well, I lost my train of thought. I'll just leave it at that. We definitely need citizen police review.
Okay, thank you. Cynthia Matthews?
I too agree. There has to be definite accountability in terms of police practices, and that can take many forms. I was on the council just in the beginning of my council experience when the police review board was in existence. I think it did not realize the potential that had been hoped for in terms of giving productive review of police practices and specific incidents. The purpose really of that board was to review police complaints. The system that we have now has the possibility for anyone to file a complaint, something they observe, something they experience. That can be filed at the police department, but at other city offices as well. There's an internal review. And in critical instance, in all of those complaints are reviewed by an independent police auditor, the others have mentioned. Very highly qualified and very demanding and very independent. And I have been involved at times reviewing those independent reviews, and they have results, they have consequences. They have personnel consequences, they have changes they lead to changes in practices. They are genuinely productive. The police auditor's review is then reviewed by a subcommittee of the city council. There are legal constraints on what can be released to the public. Others have mentioned that. It may be frustrating, but that is the legal framework in which we operate. I think the other thing that occurs, there's an internal police department review internally. Were our policies adequately followed? Do we need to follow up in terms of individual officers' responses or changing our policies? So this is a dynamic situation. It is something that the future council will look at again. It's not cast in stone, but I think the public should have confidence that there is ongoing review and accountability. And I would encourage any of you or members of the public to do a police ride-along, find out what the lived experience is of the police officers on the street. That's something anyone can do. I finally want to just mention in terms of body cameras, we are currently exploring that. We currently have all interactions are recorded with a tape recorder, and there are cameras on the cars. There are lots of kinds of body cameras out there, different technologies, different expenses. We are actively in the process of exploring that. So I don't want to say it's being resisted. Certainly this recent incident has brought it to the fore, and we are bringing forth a report on the full 21st century policing that's going on. Many of those things we've been doing for 2 decades, so we are not afraid of that. We think it's good to formalize it and bring it to the public.
1 minute follow-up.
Yeah.
Do you feel that citizens can feel comfortable filing reports about the police, given that it's going through the police?
It doesn't have to be filed at the police department. It can be filed at other city offices. So if they don't feel comfortable, we'd like to know about it.
Yeah.
But I think the report does go directly to the police once you,
Right.
it doesn't matter if you're in Parks and Rec
Right.
or Public Works Department, you file that report. It's good, so it's,
Yeah.
I think that's the response, you know, you're looking for, but
Yeah.
I don't hear a response to it.